To the amateur criminal, some crimes appear so perfect in conception that they are tried over and over again. Presumably, the criminals erroneously consider themselves so ingenious that no one else could ever have thought up such a plan. One of the most overused schemes is the replacement body plot, where the unidentifiable remains of an innocent victim are used in place of the killer, usually as part of an insurance scam or as a means to disappear. It wouldn't do to call the scam tried and true because that implies it is ordinarily successful. This is doubtful. Of course, sometimes the plot works, just how often we'll never know. Most of the time, however, it fails miserably. In 1925, Oakland chemist Charles Schwartz, 45, thought he could get away with a replacement body scam, but his apparently well-planned disappearing act quickly fell apart thanks to a few unforeseen incidents. He was tripped up by a couple of poorly timed events, an unexpected visit from a night watchman at his factory, and a car accident that kept him from making a clean getaway, eventually brought about his downfall. An Alsatian, Schwartz arrived in California claiming to be a master chemist with a degree from the University of Heidelberg. It would later be revealed that he had no such degree, and his only chemistry background came as a soldier, not an officer as he claimed, in the French army during World War I, when he was listed as a chemical apprentice. At the time of his crime, Schwartz was working as a chemist for a small company searching for what was then the holy grail of the chemical industry, a process for manufacturing artificial silk. He was essentially looking for a means to manufacture nylon, which DuPont researchers perfected in 1935. Little did anyone know, in reality the esteemed scientist was simply a confidence man. He may at one point have been seeking a means to create a silk purse from a sow's ear, but at the time he disappeared, Schwartz was concentrating on his con game. A very secretive man for obvious reasons, Schwartz was paranoid about both his potential invention and being uncovered as a flim-flam artist. He claimed to have been the target of agents who were out to destroy him, but just how much truth there was to his assertions cannot be determined. In June 1925, Schwartz was sued by a 22-year-old Swiss immigrant, Elizabeth Adam, in a heart bomb suit for pretending to be an unmarried man named Stein who promised her marriage. Schwartz denied the allegations and contended that it was simply a blackmail attempt. He told the press that Adam was a tool of a foreign silk and chemical concerns who were also seeking artificial silk. "This is merely a plot to discredit me in my business," Schwartz said. "I defy them to go any further with the action." Just when Schwartz hatched his plan to fake his own death was never discovered. There is some circumstantial evidence that he was aware that some people were onto his con and that his elaborate fraud was falling apart. He had managed to secure cash loans with stock in his company, Pacific Cellulose, by assuring investors that he was on the threshold of a major breakthrough. In reality, he was nowhere near discovering anything remotely resembling artificial silk. Not only was he misleading investors by showing them real silk and claiming it was manufactured, at least one public demonstration was a total bomb. He also claimed one demonstration that never actually took place. When a year passed and nothing apparently was done toward putting the establishment in operation, the better-informed residents of the community began to regard Schwartz's word pictures as dreams, said Emery Smith, president of the industrial inspection firm Smith, Emery & Company, after the plot unraveled. Those who shared that view doubtless were not greatly surprised to learn of the tangled mystery that was unearthed when the plant was wrecked. Schwartz did manage to get Pacific Cellulose to insure his life for about $180,000, with a clause that included double indemnity for an accidental death. With that insurance money, much of which was payable to his wife, as a prime motivator, Schwartz set about faking his death. Obviously, he needed a victim, and either through planning or serendipity, he encountered an old nemesis, Gilbert Barbie, and selected him as victim. Barbet was a veteran of the Great War who was traveling the country as an itinerant preacher. For several months prior to arriving in Oakland, he was living with friends in another California town, spreading the gospel and handing out religious tracts from an organization based in his hometown of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Apparently, Barba and Schwartz had a falling out over a woman, L.G. Shoemaker, a friend of Barbie's, told the press after the plot fell apart. This woman, I don't know what her name was, crossed the paths of both men, Shoemaker said. I am almost certain that Schwartz swore vengeance. Barbie served in the armed forces with Shoemaker, a former military intelligence officer, and it was at an army camp that Barbie shared the story of the love triangle. Around 10 p.m. on July 30th, 1925, Schwartz was working alone in his chemistry lab in the warehouse that was the headquarters for Pacific Cellulose. He had just talked to the president of the company, H.R. Kleinjung, and reported an important breakthrough. Shortly after that call, Schwartz telephoned his wife, Alice, to let her know he was heading home. Within a few minutes of that final call, firefighters were summoned to the Pacific Cellulose plant by the night watchman, who had unsuccessfully tried to extinguish a blaze that began in Schwartz's laboratory. The watchman, W.E. Gonzalez, had last seen Schwartz in the laboratory, mixing a highly flammable concoction that included a large dose of carbon disulfide. Gonzalez recalled later that his dog, which accompanied him on his rounds, ran into the lab and began sniffing and whining in front of a large closet. Schwartz ordered Gonzalez to take the dog out and told the watchman to go to bed. I prowled around the plant for a time, as is my custom. For some reason I was uneasy, however, and I was awake when I heard an explosion nearby, Gonzalez told police. I ran out of my room to find that the laboratory of the plant was on fire. By the time Gonzalez grabbed a fire extinguisher, the entire lab was engulfed, and he summoned the fire department. Firefighters put out the blaze only to find a badly charred body in the lab. Because Schwartz was the only person present, according to Gonzalez, the body was logically believed to be his. The fire, however, had been put out before it had a chance to completely destroy the lab, and there were indications that some sort of accelerant had been used to start the blaze. A burn trail from an outside door toward the lab established that someone had set the fire before fleeing. Within 24 hours, despite an eyewitness examination by Alice Schwartz, investigators rejected the notion that Schwartz had died in the fire and set out to learn the identity of the man who did. Unbeknownst to police, fate had dealt Schwartz a bad hand. He had previously purchased a train ticket to Southern California and had left the plant with plenty of time to make his train. On his way to the station, however, Schwartz crashed his car and injured his leg. He was forced to abandon the car and limped to a nearby boarding house where he rented a room. For the next week, while police across the nation searched for him, Schwartz laid low in the house, where he was remembered later as a gentlemanly boarder. He even participated in a birthday party for one of the other guests. Alice Schwartz was adamant that the body found in the embers of the factory was her husband, but police established through Bertillon measurements that not only was the man taller and heavier than Schwartz, the bone structure of his skull was radically different than what pictures of Schwartz showed. When eyewitnesses described two men entering the factory in the early evening and identified one as Schwartz, the search was launched to determine who the other man was. The only missing person who fit the description provided by eyewitnesses was an elderly Portuguese man named Joseph Rodrigues, who had disappeared a few days earlier. For the next day or so, police worked from the theory that Schwartz had murdered Rodrigues. They attempted to identify the body as Rodrigues's by dental records, which had already disqualified the remains as belonging to Schwartz. The victim's mouth showed that 4 teeth were missing, and that another tooth, that may have served as the anchor for a dental plate, had been damaged, possibly when Schwartz removed the plate. The dead man is not Schwartz, said dentist A.J. Nielsen. The teeth vary widely from Schwartz's teeth. Nielsen told police that several days before Schwartz's disappearance, he was contacted to see if certain molds of his mouth had been destroyed. He seemed quite satisfied when I told him they had, the dentist recounted. What Schwartz did not consider was the paper records Nielsen had in his possession. Meanwhile, Dr. E.O. Heinrich, a Berkeley criminologist, examined Schwartz's lab and issued a scathing report of his findings. There was no material on hand with which to make synthetic silk. There were no regular lights. Schwartz, when he worked at night, used an old gasoline lamp for light, Heinrich told the press. The chemicals, to my notion, were just put there for camouflage. There was no sign of the order one would expect a man with a scientific turn of mind to insist on. Police located a series of letters from Schwartz to his wife, indicating that he eventually planned to resurface in Europe. In one letter, he instructed his wife, a native of Great Britain, to educate the children in England. Other clues continued to bolster the theory that Schwartz had not died in the fire. Hair analysis using samples from the victim and some taken from Schwartz's toiletries clearly indicated that the victim was not Schwartz. The case suffered a major setback on August 3rd when Joseph Rodriguez reappeared in Oakland alive and well. Rodriguez did not explain his reason for a sudden vacation, other than to say that he felt it was his privilege to bum around for a while if he saw fit, the Oakland Tribune reported dryly. When Rodriguez was eliminated as the victim, police began looking at clues left at the scene of the fire in the form of religious tracts. A witness came forward who claimed to have given a lift to a man who roughly fitted the description of the deceased several days before. His story led authorities to Los Gatos, California, where they located letters written by Barbie to persons with whom he stayed in that city. The handwriting on those letters was similar to scribblings found on the religious tracts. In addition, a friend of Barbie's positively identified the burned body as belonging to his buddy. Having identified the victim, the search for Schwartz intensified, and his picture was published in the local press. On August 11, 1925, when his temporary landlord identified his new lodger as Schwartz and notified police, the criminal chemist shot himself through the head. Schwartz left some letters to his wife, claiming that he had killed Barbie in self-defense and panicked. Those claims were rejected by authorities. "I did not plan anything before this happened," he wrote. Schwartz's death did provide some answers. Schwartz admitted killing Barbie 2 days before he started the fire and took as many identifying documents and pictures from his home as he could to make tracing him more difficult. Returning to the lab on Thursday, July 30th, he prepared Barbie's body and the lab for the conflagration. However, he was surprised by the appearance of the night watchman and his dog, which delayed the fire. Finally, he missed his train to Southern California when he crashed his car trying to get out of town. Because Schwartz committed suicide, the insurance companies refused to pay out on the policies. When his estate was finally probated, he had a net worth of $600. Barbie, a military veteran, was buried with military honors in the National Cemetery at the Presidio in San Francisco.